Christopher Nolan's movies often feel like elaborate puzzles. He loves scattering little clues and fragments throughout the story, letting the audience piece everything together on their own. But with Tenet, it seems that signature style might have backfired. This time, the puzzle was so complex that only a handful of viewers grasped the meaning right after watching, while for most people, the film remained a tangled mystery.
You're not shooting the bullet, you're catching it.
Whoa.
Because of that, Tenet is still seen as one of Nolan's most misunderstood works.
How can it move before I touch it? The cause comes before effect.
Don't try to understand it. Feel it.
Which raises a fair question. What if there's no deeper meaning at all? Would anything important remain if we stripped away all the flashy sci-fi elements? The time inversion, entropy, and all those science-sounding concepts? In this breakdown, I'll argue that Tenet not only has meaning, but that it's brilliantly hidden inside the concept of time inversion, a device that perfectly reinforces the film's central idea. Just to be clear, I'm not here to fact-check the science. The inversion and entropy in Tenet are purely creative ideas used to drive the plot. Let's leave the physics debates to the theorists and scientists. I'm less interested in Tenet's flashy surface, the cool time tricks and explosive action, and more in what's hidden underneath it. But before we dive into the deeper meaning, let's quickly refresh the story itself. At the core of the plot is the concept of inversion and entropy, a sci-fi idea that allows objects and people to move backward through time. The main character, known only as the protagonist, gets pulled into the work of a secret organization fighting a threat that comes from the future.
Your duty transcends national interests. This is about survival.
That threat centers around something called the algorithm, a weapon capable of inverting the entire world's timeline.
We think it's a type of inverse radiation triggered by nuclear fission.
If it's activated, only those whose entropy matches this new direction of time will survive. For everyone else, it's the end. To stop the disaster, the protagonist teams up with a mysterious operative named Neil. Their mission is to take down a powerful oligarch, Sator. Sator is terminally ill and plans to end his life on his own terms by triggering the algorithm at the moment of his death, wiping out the entire world with him.
When I take this, it's all over. The way the world ends.
With the help of Sator's wife, Kat, the heroes manage to pull it off. The oligarch is taken out, and the explosion meant to trigger the algorithm is stopped. To do it, they have to use the same tactics as their enemy, inverting themselves, living through a stretch of time in reverse, crossing paths with their own past selves, and ultimately preventing the weapon from being activated and erasing all life.
Just save the world.
This tangled journey leads the protagonist to a shocking realization. Every event, every choice, every sacrifice was part of a carefully crafted plan, one that he himself will set in motion, but in his own future.
This whole operation's a temporal pincer. Whose? Yours!
That's where the film brings us to its first big, obvious question. Did the hero ever truly have a choice? Or were his every thought and action predetermined from the start? In his conversation with Michael, we get a clear hint. Everything they're talking about in the finale has already happened by that point.
2 weeks ago, the same day as the Kiev Upper Siege, we spotted a detonation in northern Siberia, just where Stats 12 was.
And it's not the only sign of fate at play. Take Neil, for example. From the very beginning, it's obvious he knows more than he lets on.
Well, I prefer soda water.
No, you don't.
Only in the end do we realize that he's already met the protagonist in the future and has been following his instructions the whole time. The Oslo airport scene, where the protagonist fights himself while inverted, is one of the clearest examples of the story's built-in inevitability. At the time, he has no idea that his opponent is actually him. Later, when the encounter plays out again from the other side of the time loop, everything happens exactly as it did the first time. It's a perfect illustration that the entire chain of events is already written, and nothing can change it. We see a similar moment with Kat. She spots a woman diving off a yacht, not realizing she's looking at herself, but from the future. Once again, Nolan brings us back to the idea of a closed loop, where the beginning and the end are part of the same unbroken line. In Tenet, Nolan builds the plot around one of the most common theories used to resolve the famous grandfather paradox. The premise is simple. If a time traveler kills their grandfather before their parent is born, they erase the possibility of their own existence. To avoid this kind of logical dead end, science fiction often uses the concept of fixed timelines, and that's exactly what we see here. In this framework, the past, present, and future form a single structure, and every action the hero takes is already woven into the fabric of events. The fixed timeline concept is built on the idea that everything that has ever happened, or ever will happen, is already locked into a single, unchangeable thread of time. Time travel to the past might be possible, but anything a traveler does is already part of history. Their influence isn't rewriting events, it's simply playing out what was always meant to happen. In this model, there are no alternate versions of the past or future. Even if someone tried to go back and kill their grandfather, the outcome would be predetermined. The attempt would fail, otherwise the traveler could never have existed in the first place. This neatly avoids time paradoxes, but raises a deeper, more unsettling question. Does free will exist at all?
Well, what about free will?
It's possible Nolan wanted to explore exactly that. The idea that every choice we make is preordained, and we're simply acting out a script that's already been written. Yet the movie treats this theme with a subtle touch. Yes, nearly every event in Tenet turns out to have been predetermined, but the mastermind behind the operation keeps repeating that the participants shouldn't know everything. Some information, if revealed, could change how they act, and might even throw the delicate chain of events out of balance.
There's a Cold War, cold as ice. To even know its true nature is to lose. This is knowledge divided.
You're going to warn me.
Ignorance is our ammunition.
And here's where things take an interesting turn. In Tenet's world, free will seems to exist, just in a very specific way. The branch of philosophy that accepts this coexistence of predetermination and choice is called compatibilism. Compatibilism is closely tied to determinism, the idea that every event, including our decisions, inevitably follows from existing causes and conditions. If we could rewind time and live through the same moment again, everything would unfold exactly the same way because the starting conditions haven't changed. Just like a ball will always fall to the ground because of gravity, human behavior, from a determinist's perspective, follows the same kind of predictability. At first glance, that sounds like it completely contradicts the idea of free will. If everything's already set, where's the room for personal choice? But compatibilism argues that determinism and free will don't cancel each other out. Even if our actions are part of a pre-written script, we still make decisions within it, shaping how we experience and carry out the path that's been laid out for us. Free will in Tenet doesn't mean we can rewrite the final outcome. It's about something else, acting in line with our own desires and motives, which themselves are part of the deterministic framework of the world. Even in a fixed timeline like Nolan's, our choices still matter.
Well, what about free will?
That bullet wouldn't have moved if you hadn't put your hand there. Either way we run the tape, you made it happen.
We're not resisting predestination. We're woven into it, actively driving events toward their inevitable result. Nolan makes this point clear in the final conversation between Neil and the protagonist.
What's happened's happened, which is an expression of faith in the mechanics of the world. It's not an excuse to do nothing.
The protagonist asks whether free will can even exist if everything's already decided. Neil answers that knowing the future shouldn't freeze you in place. On the contrary, understanding how the world works doesn't mean you stop acting. Every choice you make is already part of the timeline, and that's exactly what gives it weight.
Can't leave anything to chance.
But knowing Nolan's style, it's hard to believe he wanted to leave us with just that thought. His films almost never have only one thematic layer, and in Tenet there's indeed another, far more intriguing perspective, one that's tied directly to the supposed villain of the story, Sator. In Tenet, there's a small detail that's easy to miss, but it's key to understanding the whole story. We never learn the protagonist's real name. At one point, he simply calls himself the protagonist.
I'm the protagonist of this operation.
We usually think of that word as the label for the central figure of any story, the one whose goals drive the plot forward. By traditional storytelling rules, the protagonist has an opposite, the antagonist, whose actions create conflict and obstacles. Here, it seems obvious. Sator wants to destroy the world, and the protagonist wants to save it. But there's a twist. If you listen closely to one key conversation, it becomes clear that the protagonist isn't the only one trying to stop a catastrophe.
I'm the protagonist of this operation.
You are a protagonist. Did you think you were the only one capable of saving the world?
To figure out who this other savior is, we have to return to the movie's core concept: time inversion. For two people moving through time in opposite directions, reality looks completely different. What's forward motion for one is backward motion for the other. Heat for one could feel like cold to the other. And most importantly, one person's death can mean life for the other.
One man's probability of death is another man's possibility for a life.
Let's flip the perspective and look at the events through the eyes of those unseen players backing Sator. According to him, their world is in the middle of an ecological collapse. The ecosystem is ruined, resources are running out, and humanity is teetering on the edge of extinction.
How could they want to kill us?
Because their oceans rose and their rivers ran dry. Don't you see? They have no choice but to turn back.
Every single day brings them closer to a point of no return. Faced with this reality, they take a radical, even desperate, step to invert the entropy of the entire planet, not as some wild experiment or personal whim, but as a last-ditch attempt to give life a chance, not just for themselves, but for countless generations yet to come. It's an effort to rewrite history, not to buy a few more decades for their own time, but to preserve humanity as a whole, even if that means living in an inverted world.
Knowing this, do you still want them to stop?
Yes.
And here's the tricky question. From their point of view, who's really the protagonist of this story? Sator, fighting for the future, or our nameless hero, who clings to the present and, in doing so, may be condemning future generations to extinction?
Each generation looks out for its own survival.
That's exactly what they're doing.
Seen from this angle, the roles reverse. Sator becomes the savior, while the protagonist turns into the one blocking the plan, acting to protect the here and now rather than the what's to come. This perspective even echoes another Nolan film, Interstellar. Remember Dr. Mann's monologue?
We can care deeply, selflessly, about those we know, but that empathy rarely extends beyond our line of sight.
He was willing to sacrifice others for his own survival. The protagonist does the same here, saving his own world and his own generation, while ignoring the billions of lives that will never exist if humanity stays on its current path toward disaster.
Each generation looks out for its own survival.
Evolution has yet to transcend that simple barrier.
In a way, Kat operates by the same logic as the protagonist. She's focused on the future of her son, and at best, the next few generations. Her concerns don't extend beyond her own personal story.
Knew how hard it would be to get people to work together to save the species instead of themselves or their children.
Sator, on the other hand, as ruthless and cold as he may seem, becomes, in their world, someone willing to strip away his own humanity in order to save humankind.
He was prepared to destroy his own humanity in order to save the species.
Here's the interesting part. The future Sator describes looks eerily similar to the world of Interstellar. If you want to imagine what he's trying to preserve, just picture that setting.
The wheat had died, but mostly we had dust.
We wore strips of sheet would sometimes over our nose and mouth so we wouldn't breathe so much of it.
A collapsing climate, shrinking crop yields, the extinction of essential agricultural staples. People everywhere are struggling to survive on a planet slowly turning into a dusty wasteland. Every passing day is another step toward inevitable extinction.
We farmers, we sit here every year when the rains fail and we say, next year. Well, next year ain't gonna save us nor the one after that.
Technology can't save them anymore, and science has hit its ceiling. There's only one path left: to tamper with the most fundamental laws of nature. For them, time inversion isn't a whim or a scientific experiment. It's a last-ditch hope, a way to reverse the course of events, restore Earth to a more livable state, and give humanity a second chance. And for that, they're willing to sacrifice the present, to destroy it, so their world can survive its own death. In their eyes, Sator, despite all his darkness, embodies that hope. resistance from people in the past looks to them like nothing more than selfish refusal to think beyond one's own lifetime, as the film itself puts it.
Each generation looks out for its own survival.
So, the protagonist isn't actually the only one fighting to save the world.
You are a protagonist. Did you think you were the only one capable of saving the world?
It's just that for him and for Sator, those are two completely different worlds. And in that contrast lies one of Tenet's most important ideas. For Nolan, inversion isn't just a flashy trick with time running backward. It's a metaphor for how easily morality can flip depending on your point of view. In an inverted reality, the line between good and evil blurs. What's a tragedy for one side can be a lifeline for the other.
One man's probability of death is another man's possibility for a life.
To the people of the future, Sator isn't a villain. He's the man willing to sacrifice someone else's present so that their future can exist. Destroying today's world isn't seen as an act of cruelty, but as a necessary step to save millions of lives that otherwise would never be born. This subjectivity of morality is the key to understanding Nolan's vision. A catastrophe for some can be salvation for others, and deciding who's right in that equation is a question with no clear answer. To really understand this moral clash, it helps to remember the famous trolley problem. Imagine you're standing at a railroad switch. A runaway train is speeding toward 5 people tied to the tracks. If you do nothing, they'll die. But you can pull the lever and divert the train onto another track, where there's only one person. You'd save 5 lives, but take 1 in the process. From a utilitarian point of view, the right move is the one that results in the greatest overall benefit, even if it means sacrificing someone. In this case, that means pulling the lever, losing 1 life to save 5. The value of the action is measured by the total good it creates for the majority. But from a deontological perspective, the moral rules flip. This approach is based on strict ethical principles. Taking 1 life is wrong under any circumstances. Even if it saves many others, the fact that you consciously chose an action that caused someone's death makes you morally responsible for it. In that view, you've committed an act of killing, and that's ethically unacceptable. If you apply this logic to Tenet, the parallel becomes clear. Sator, or the forces backing him, is like the switch operator who's willing to send the train toward 1 person to save 5. Only in the film's scale, it's not just 5 lives. It's countless generations in the future that could be spared at the cost of destroying today's world. The protagonist, on the other hand, is the one trying to stop that switch from being pulled, keeping the present intact even if it means disaster for what's to come. Through this clash, Nolan nudges the audience toward a tough question. What matters more, holding on to your principles or saving lives at any cost? The moral relativity he explores through the concept of time inversion is like looking into a mirror. The reflection seems to match your every move, but when you raise your right hand, the image raises its left. So who's actually right? At the start of the film, the protagonist is ready to die rather than betray his allies. But what if, in the future, there are people willing to die for their allies, and to them, the protagonist and his team are the threat to survival? Flip the perspective, and those the protagonist sees as villains become the loved ones that others are fighting to protect. In the end, the question of who's the hero and who's the villain depends entirely on where you're standing. Drop a comment and let me know how closely my take matches yours. And if you enjoy this kind of deep dive into Nolan's films, hit that like button. That way I'll know it's worth continuing the series.